My name is Ada, and I've been called a jerk for telling my 13-year-old daughter she can't go on a school trip even though she raised the money for it herself. To understand why, I need to start from the beginning. I'm 34 and my husband is 35. Our daughter Iris is 13. Financially, we are not well off. We get by through significant sacrifice and careful budgeting, stretching every dollar to cover our essentials. Despite this constant tightrope walk, we have always done our absolute best to ensure Iris never feels she is lacking. We buy her art supplies because she's passionate about drawing. We set aside money so she can go to the movies or get a slice of pizza with her friends. We provide these extras within reason, always making sure her core needs, a warm home, nutritious meals, stable clothing, are met without question. She has never had to worry about whether the heat would be turned on or if there would be food on the table. We have made certain of that. Her school organizes educational trips periodically. This term there was an overnight excursion planned to a nearby city, focused on visiting historical sites and cultural monuments. The experience sounded wonderful, but the cost was substantial, what I'd call a pretty penny for any family, and for ours it was a significant sum. When Iris first came to me, her eyes bright with excitement, and asked for the money to go, my heart sank. I had to tell her we were very sorry, but we simply did not have the funds for it at that moment. She was visibly upset, her disappointment a tangible weight in the room. Trying to offer a solution, I suggested that perhaps the three of us could put our heads together and brainstorm ways to raise the money before the payment deadline. I floated ideas like a neighborhood bake sale, or that she could sell some of her artwork or take on small commissions. Instead of engaging with the idea, she huffed at me, declared she would get the money herself, and stalked away. This is, I admit, the first point where I may have made a mistake. I did not follow up with her. In the relentless rhythm of my life, working long days, managing our household, the conversation slipped my mind. It wasn't a conscious decision to ignore it, it simply became a non-priority, especially since she never brought it up again. I suppose I made an assumption. I assumed that, faced with the scale of the task, she had given up on the idea of the trip. Quietly, and without telling anyone, I began setting aside a tiny portion from each of my paychecks. It was a just-in-case fund, a small act of hope that maybe, somehow, a solution would emerge, though I truly didn't expect one. Then 2 days ago, everything changed. Iris approached me, her posture a mix of defiance and triumph, and announced she had the money. My initial reaction was shock, followed immediately by confusion and a spike of parental worry. My first thought was that she must have sold something important of hers without asking. I was preparing to scold her for not consulting us first when I asked the crucial question, "How did you get so much money?" The reality was worse than I had imagined. She hadn't sold belongings. She had, quite literally, gone out and begged. She had approached her friends' parents, her art teacher, and even, to my profound horror, strangers on the street. But she hadn't just asked for help funding a school trip. She had told them a story in which our family was destitute. She claimed we were so extremely poor that we often couldn't afford dinner, forcing her to go to bed hungry. She said we couldn't buy her new clothes, so she wore the same outfits for years. She implied we couldn't support any of her hobbies or interests. She painted a picture of a poverty-stricken existence that was simply, categorically untrue. We are not rich, we budget meticulously, but we have never missed a meal. Her closet, while not overflowing with designer labels, is filled with clean-fitting and seasonally appropriate clothing. Her art supplies are a regular line item in our budget. She had not shared our true financial reality, which is one of careful management and occasional strain. Instead, she had fabricated a narrative of profound neglect and hardship, guilting people into opening their wallets. I was appalled. More than that, I was deeply, burningly embarrassed. The thought of our friends, her teachers, and even compassionate strangers believing we would let our child go hungry was mortifying. I told her, my voice firm with a mix of anger and hurt, that what she had done was completely unacceptable. I said she had to return every cent and that she absolutely could not use that money for the trip. My initial impulse was to say she couldn't go at all, a punishment for the deception, but my husband, while fully agreeing about the tainted money, thought that was too strong a reaction. When Iris, sobbing, ran to him, he sided with me completely. She cried and shouted that the deadline was only a week away and there was no way she could get the money again in time. I told her that was truly sad and that maybe if she had come to me weeks ago to make a plan, as I'd originally suggested, she would have been in a better position. But as it stood, she had 1 week to find the money through honest means. She stormed upstairs to her room and has been sulking there ever since. So I posed the question online, am I the jerk for refusing to let her use the money she raised, given how she raised it? The response was a firestorm. Many commenters focused laser-like on my admitted failure to follow up. One wrote, "Here is where I may have made a mistake. I didn't follow up with her at all, so basically you're punishing your daughter because you failed as a parent." To that, I responded with some frustration, "Call it that if you want, I guess. I am not disagreeing that I should have followed up with her. However, she is almost in high school and should know to follow up herself as well, especially when it is something that is so important to her. Another commenter threw my words back at me. I should have followed up, but she's almost in high school. You're a fully grown adult, by the way, and she should follow up since it's so important to her. She should have known better. She should have talked to me. Jesus Christ, do you hear yourself? Poor kid. That one stung, but it also solidified my position. I replied, I'm going to be fully honest here. I do not believe this part specifically was solely or even mostly my fault. Considering this was so important to her, I'm shocked she didn't follow up with me. I told her, let's make a plan. She said no and went off on her own. I'm not saying the blame is completely absent from me, but when you work 80 hours a week, things slip your mind. Following up was partly on her since this was a very big deal for her. I'm shocked that people think the blame is 100% on me for not chasing down my almost high schooler to figure out a plan. Other comments were more cutting. One stated, the first 18 years of your child's life are an audition for the role you'll play in their adult lives. I have a feeling you're not going to get the part you want. Another accused, wow, you're a raging jerk and a terrible mom. Your daughter was resourceful. You told her you all couldn't afford this trip, so where is the lie? You also told her she could go if she had the money, and she has the money. Now you're shamming her and going back on your word. You suck. To that, I clarified, perhaps too sharply, I don't know how many times I have to say this. She did not lie about us not being able to afford the trip. She lied about not being able to afford food and clothing in order to guilt people out of their money. Next time, try reading the post. The commenter dismissed me. You keep telling yourself that. I ended the exchange. I mean, if you think that lying to scam people out of their money is an acceptable way to make money, I guess that's where we differ. Have a good one. Seeing the consistent misunderstanding, I added an edit to my original post to make my position crystal clear. Since people are missing this, if she had just said we couldn't afford the trip and asked for donations, I would have been okay with it, even if I still don't think our financials should be public knowledge like that. She did lie and guilt people by telling them that we couldn't afford dinner many nights, so she went to bed hungry, and that we couldn't afford new clothes for her, so she often wore the same clothes for years at a time, and that we hadn't paid for any hobbies or extracurriculars. I am not denying we aren't well off, but we are not poverty-stricken like she implied. Of course, the trip isn't denied because she told people we can't afford it. It is denied because she lied to people to get them to give her money. The story, however, did not end there. 3 days after the initial blow-up, I sat down with Iris after work. I expected continued resentment, but instead, she melted into tears almost immediately, telling me she was sorry. It was a raw, honest conversation. I asked her why she hadn't just come to me to make a plan. She admitted she had been upset and frustrated when I said we couldn't afford it, and that she should have swallowed her pride and worked with me. I, in turn, apologized for not following up and for making assumptions. She acknowledged my apology but insisted she was mature enough to have taken the initiative herself. Then I asked the harder question. Why had she fabricated those specific painful lies about going hungry and wearing rags? I explained how serious that was, that someone could have called Child Protective Services based on her claims. Fresh tears welled in her eyes. She said she knew it was wrong, but in her panic and desperate desire to go on the trip, it seemed like the only story dramatic enough to make people help. She begged one more time to be allowed to use the money. I held firm. I told her we could not reward dishonesty, that was scammed money not earned. But then I offered a path forward. I said she would have to return the donations, but that I would sell some of our non-essential household items. Combined with the small amount I'd already saved from my paychecks, it should hopefully cover the cost of the trip. The relief that washed over her was immediate. She thanked me through her tears. Our talk deepened from there. We spoke about the time I spent away from home, about my long work hours. I apologized for not being as present as I wanted to be. She said she understood, but I vowed to try and find some way, even if I couldn't cut my hours, to create more moments for us. I hugged her and asked if she'd like to have a mother-daughter day at the park on my next day off. She accepted gladly. Before we finished, I made her a promise. I told her that in the future, if she ever faced a problem that felt this big, she needed to come to me. We would figure something out together. There would never be a need to lie to strangers for money. She agreed and apologized once more. It felt like a true resolution, a moment where she understood the gravity of her actions and I understood the gaps I had left in our communication. I left that conversation determined. I would get her on that trip if it was the last thing I did. I'd sell what I could, and if there was still a shortfall, I'd swallow my own pride and borrow from family. She had been receptive and remorseful, a far cry from the defiant teenager of a few days prior. It made me sad to remember the commenters who had prophesied she would cut contact with me the moment she turned 18. Their judgments, based on a single snapshot of a complex relationship, felt wildly off the mark. I do not hate my daughter does not hate me, I was never trying to punish her for revealing our financial constraints. My sole, unwavering issue was the deceit. I posted a final update, hoping to close the matter. Overall, a very productive discussion. I'm just glad that she realized the lying and guilting was wrong and took accountability for it. So now I'm going to do my hardest to get her on the trip. I was not trying to punish her for telling people we couldn't afford the trip. I would have preferred if she didn't broadcast our financial situation like that. But if she had got the money from telling the truth, only that we couldn't afford the trip, I would have still let her use that money to go. I just didn't want her to go with money she got dishonestly. Anyways, I don't expect any further updates and I'm ready to consider this matter closed. Even then, the commenters had final thoughts. One wondered, I can't help but wonder what the kid's point of view is. Does she think your family is poverty-stricken? Maybe she didn't think she was lying. Kids sometimes see things differently. Another countered logically, she told people they had skipped dinner multiple nights and went to bed hungry because they couldn't afford to feed her. That is not a matter of perspective. That either happened or it didn't. A skeptical commenter constructed an alternate reality. This sounds like made-up nonsense. If my son's friend comes to me and says, we are so poor I can't have dinner or new clothing, my response is not going to be, oh crappy, let me give you money for an optional trip. It's going to be, let me see how I can help with food and clothing necessities. I think Op's daughter said they couldn't afford the trip, and her friend's parents and her teachers decided to pitch in so she could join. And now Op is embarrassed. You are the jerk, Op. Your child found a solution to a problem and now you're embarrassed because you don't like the solution she found. To such comments, which seemed to willfully ignore the details I had painstakingly provided, I could only give a tired response. I do not condone her lying to others and will not reward her for that. The final lingering accusation was perhaps the most hurtful. You're the jerk, I've read your previous post. You told her you couldn't afford it, so in her mind she's poor and that's why she told people she was. Your daughter is trying to backtrack for your sake and taking the blame when really it was your fault. You said a few times that you asked her why she lied. I can't even imagine what went through her mind when you asked her this. You still would have made an issue about this as well. She's 13. She doesn't understand about finances at this age. She wants to enjoy life and not miss out. That comment missed the entire moral core of the issue. It wasn't about poverty perception or teenage desire. It was about the fundamental line between honesty and deceit, about understanding that the stories we tell have real-world consequences, and that exploiting others' compassion with falsehoods is not resourcefulness, it is wrongdoing. My job as I saw it was not to provide the trip at any cost, but to teach my daughter that some costs are too high to pay, no matter how much you want something. And in the end, through tears and difficult conversation, I believe she learned that lesson. We found an honest way forward together. That, more than any trip, was the victory.